So we are in person and online, and it's always a challenge, no matter how many times we've done it. Anyway, thank you for being here tonight with the weather kind of iffy as it is. We're the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, a chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, one of, I think it's 17 chapters across the state. So we, of course, focus on urban wildlife and those issues. You can see up here, we have a website, charlottewildlife.org, and if you have questions, you want to contact us, there's our email. We're also on social media on Facebook and Instagram. And so that's one way, a good way to keep up with us, because we do post on there a lot. But we also work at keeping our events updated on the website. All right. Huh? Click on what?
Use that to. Might do on this side.
Where did you do it?
I'd be able to click on you. You're good now.
Okay, so our mission is to create, protect, and preserve wildlife habitat, and we do it through education, like tonight, engagement and enjoyment, and actually we think all three of those E's are going to happen tonight. So, and the way we support wildlife, and this is what you're going to hear more about tonight, is through providing them with food, water, shelter, places to raise their families, same things that we need. And, you know, because we're actually all part of nature. We're not that separate from them, from wildlife. And the other thing we encourage is using sustainable practices. The big one is eliminating the use of pesticides. We really want bugs in our yard. As much as I know when I was growing up, we didn't want bugs in our yard, but we've come to learn that we need bugs. So not just, I mean, they are a huge food source for baby birds. So if you want baby birds around, and there has been a decline in birds, as if a decline in insects, decline in birds. So we can do that. And I think, you know, Alden will probably address this a little bit later, but NCWF does have the Butterfly Highway program that promotes planting pollinator garden in your yard, and you can register it with NCWF. And then the National Wildlife Federation has a certified wildlife habitat program. And if you meet, they line up some requirements, and I know some of y'all picked up the little booklets that have that on there. So that's a really good guideline, and that's for what they're looking for. And what I'll tell you, right now, May is Gardening for Wildlife Month, and so it's normally $20 to register your yard, and you can purchase a sign to put in your yard. You can purchase one like this, and there's even one that's more landscape, kind of lovely. But anyway, during the month of May, it's 20% off. So if you certify this month and or buy a sign, it's $16 to certify. So, but that's a great way, you know, it really does bring a lot into your yard. I'm not going to say anymore. I want to steal all in thunder. So we had a busy April. I just want to highlight a couple of the events that we had, just so that you can see what we do. So over here, we worked with, who is it? Crescent Communities. They sent a crew of volunteers out, and we had purchased some these are bat houses, and that's a double, so it's 2 of them on that pole. And then we did another one called a rocket box, which looks like a big popsicle. So we put those up at Chantilly Ecological Sanctuary. They already have bats there, so you only put bat boxes if you know they're bats. So we're hoping to monitor those and see what happens with those over the next couple of years. And then in the center of the Raptor Center, Carolina Raptor Center had their Steam on the Wing and the Water Day, and so we participated there. We had the theme was decomposition, so we wanted to show how leaves, and this is the bucket that had all the fun stuff in it. It had the little bugs and had worms and millipedes and roly-polies and other types of decomposers, and so they could poke around in there, they could hold the worms and whatever. And then we had a bin of just compost, so they could see the progression of it. And then we participated in the Charlotte Earth Day event at the Charlotte Museum of History, and there we were potting up seeds of pollinator plants. So it was a lot of fun. So that's how we try to support wildlife habitat through doing these fun things. Actually, they're fun. One thing I really want to highlight, on June 15th, we're having our annual fundraiser called Wild on the Water. It's kayaking and canoeing on Mountain Island Lake. We still have 8 canoes available if anybody's interested in that. All the kayaks have already been reserved, but we do have canoes available. Or if you have your own kayak or canoe or stand-up paddleboard, you can bring that on your own. It's $50 to register, and that includes the guided paddle out to an osprey nest. And then we come back, we have lunch from Common Market, and we have a raffle of some fun stuff. So we'd really love to have you come and join us. It's a really enjoyable day out there at Latta Nature Preserve. And so I'll show you this. We have one of these at the back. So this is the QR code that takes you right to the registration page. There's one on the back table. So if you want, you can sign up tonight. Or you could go to our website or our Facebook page, and there are links there where you can register. It'd be fun. So what we have coming up, we had a trash cleanup scheduled for earlier this month, but we got rained out. So we'll be doing another one of those. So just keep your eye out for that. They're actually kind of fun. I don't know if have any of y'all done the trash cleanups? We've done them on the road. We've done them in Briar Creek and Irwin Creek, and it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's like, you're like, yeah, we got all this trash out, but it's like, oh, all this trash, and then you see trash everywhere you go. But anyway, if you're interested in doing that, just keep an eye out. One thing I'm really excited about, on June 27th, we're gonna have a moth night. Anybody ever been mothing? No? I love going mothing. So what this is this really cool guy that knows a lot about the moths in Mecklenburg County sets up a sheet with the UV light. Of course, we're out there at night in the dark, and that light attracts the moths, and it attracts beetles and all kinds of things, and you find other things that are in the woods at night. It's just, it's cool. So anyway, we'll be doing that on June 27th. There's the registration on that. There will be a sign up for it, because we do have to limit the number to about 20, because you just can't, otherwise you're on top of each other. So anyway, the registration for that will be coming out soon. And then on June 29th, I believe Alden, you and some other folks are going to be at the Innovation Barn. So I don't know if y'all have ever heard of that. That is part of Envision Charlotte. It's a nonprofit that's promoting circular economy. The Envision Barn is this huge building. They have different, I don't know if you call them vendors, different little companies that rent space in there, and it's all stuff, you know, like there's composting. There's a group that collects egg cartons and other things that they can repackage food in for people. But anyway, we'll have a table there with an activity. So I encourage you to check that out. Now, what you all came here for, so it's gardening for wildlife, creating backyard habitat with Alden Picard. So I've left a bio at home. Huh? But anyway, so Alden is conservation coordinator for North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and works closely with our chapter and other chapters in the Charlotte area. There are some other coordinators throughout the state. So anyway, it's wonderful working with Alden. He's been an environmental educator for many years. And when I first met Alden, I was pretty impressed. And then the more I got to know him, the more impressed I've been. And, you know, it's just great, like going on a nature walk with him. He knows so much, and it's just really good at communicating all of that. He lives here in Charlotte with his wife and cat. And let's see what else. Oh, you graduated from Warren Wilson. Okay. And see, I told you I was going to forget.
That's fine, that's
And he
fine.
knows a lot of our tech stuff. So let me introduce you to Alden Picard.
Thank you, Donna. Excellent. Thank you, Donna, for that wonderful introduction. I first met Donna, who is the president of the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, who is the local chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. They were founded in 2013. So they just had their 10-year, we just had our 10-year anniversary. I was working at Discovery Place Nature with Sharon over here, actually. And that's where the Wildlife Stewards have these monthly meetings pre-COVID. And I had to stay late to keep the museum open for all these wildlife nerds. But I was also a wildlife nerd, so. Yeah, and I did, and my wife still calls me a Luddite to this day, but I think that I can manage. So, welcome everyone in person. I see a lot of familiar faces, so good to see y'all. Welcome to everybody online. If you guys online want to take a second and put it in the chat just where you're tuning in from. I'm gonna switch presentations here. Maybe in the room, if you're sitting next to someone you don't know, maybe introduce yourself while I take about 60 seconds to flop the technology here.
Hi, this is Deal.
And we're gonna see if this works here.
I do, yeah, I do. I work with Donna. We work. I have, gotcha.
We try our best here.
Well, I have. So we are.
That's why I decided to do the job.
Right.
It's my retirement job.
Go ahead, close that.
I think that's what a lot of,
Yes.
more interest.
Oh, yeah.
Share screen.
Yeah. It's a lot of.
Yeah, well.
Oh, it is, it's fun, I love it. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah.
We were doing this for years, so I've been going here for years.
Okay. All right, I think I have successfully shared the screen. Appreciate y'all's patience. So, yeah, so today we're here to talk about gardening for wildlife, creating, and it's just so easy to say backyard habitats, but we don't need to hide nature and wildlife in our backyard. So these can be front and side too, and actually front and side are encouraged. It's basically just encouraged to promote wildlife and restore plant communities wherever you have access to. So a lot of the work that I do as a conservation coordinator with the Wildlife Federation is with community and habitat restoration. So not to get ahead of myself, I've been with the Wildlife Federation now since September of last year. And as Donna said, before that, I've been in the field of environmental education for 10+ years. I graduated from Warren Wilson College with a degree in environmental education in 2012, and I have a master's degree from UNC Wilmington. It was a resource management focus. I did that in 2015. But for me, and then probably for y'all, is anyone here travel from outside of the Charlotte area? Raise your hands, everyone from the Charlotte area here. I'm gonna do a couple more polls. Raise your hand if you lived in North Carolina your entire life. Okay, excellent. Raise your hand if you lived in North Carolina for at least 20 years. Okay, most people at least 20 years. Raise your hand if you lived here in North Carolina for less than 5 years. Less than 2 years. So that's actually pretty good to know, because y'all probably already start to have a general understanding of our climate, our development, our animals and stuff like that. I'm a product of Wake County, Raleigh, North Carolina. I was raised on Falls Lake in northern Wake County. So I grew up running around in the woods, chasing and collecting critters, following beaver dams and fishing, and coming in when it was dark and time for dinner. I think I might have been part of that last generation. So I'm standing here today because I've had a love and passion for nature and wildlife my entire life. And what's great about my job now is to bring people together who have that same passion. And I imagine every one of you in here has a similar story to me, whether it's in your formative years or later in life. You guys are all here because you have interest in nature and wildlife or the environment. And if not, maybe you're here because you're interested in, and that's always a great start. So what we're gonna do today, this is just a quick, boring outline. We'll learn a little bit about NCWF, and then we're gonna talk about what I say the problem is and what the solution is, how to do it, and some of our programs that we use with the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. So, without further ado, I imagine everyone's probably heard of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation by now. You're here, so somehow you heard about it. We've been working since 1945 to protect, conserve, and restore wildlife and habitat across North Carolina. We are a true wildlife conservation group. Hunting and fishing was a big start of how we formed. Hunters and fishers. Hunters and fishers are some of the biggest conservations. There's no animals you can't hunt, right? So we welcome people with any interest, birders, paddlers, anyone that has an interest in wildlife and habitat. Come on in, you're in the right place. And we understand that everyone has different and similar interests, and we welcome all. And we are the only nonprofit in the state that focuses on wildlife, and wildlife from the mountains to the sea. All right. How do we do that? So we understand that wildlife and habitat are inextricably linked. Can't have wildlife without habitat. Can't have habitat without wildlife. So to perform the mission work that we do, we understand that there needs to be recognition of issues that affect wildlife and the environment at the policy level. We need a critical mass of people that are making sure wildlife and habitat aren't taken for granted across the state. And then we need a grassroots network of folks working to do this boots on the ground habitat restoration and work that we do across the state. So policy and advocacy. We strongly influence policies that impact wildlife at the state and federal level. So a lot of our staff resources go into policy and advocacy, and a lot of that is behind the scenes, and they do a great job, but it's not my department. I find it interesting and fascinating, and I think we should all be civically engaged. But NCWF focuses on state and federal level policy. We also make sure that there's opportunities for families and children and everyone to experience the outdoors, to just foster an appreciation and awareness of how awesome the biodiversity is in North Carolina. More salamanders in the mountains in our state than anywhere else in the world. Some of the biggest estuarine systems on our coast, the most productive estuaries in the world are in North Carolina, and then everything in between in the Piedmont. We want to provide opportunities for people to experience that. And then lastly, we want to restore and clean up our habitat through our local wildlife chapters, our community partners. We get out there and we plant trees. How many trees did you plant last year, Donna?
60.
Yeah, or how many trees did you help? And it's not just trees, right? It's pollinator plants too. Feed the bees, feed the birds, feed the squirrels, feed the wild turkey. So that's how NCWF works in a nutshell. And this is my arena of chapters and people, and I love it. It's fantastic to bring people together to ensure that wildlife is advocated for. We have 19 chapters across the state. This is just a sample of some of them. And for those of y'all that are not affiliated with one of our community wildlife chapters, and I'm talking to the folks online too, even if you're not from Charlotte, we have chapters across the state. And I do highly encourage you to reach out or get involved with your local chapter. You can send me an email. I can connect you. We want y'all to get involved with your local chapter, even if you just want to go plant a tree or pick up trash. I do encourage y'all to get involved. We have a lot of fun. We learn, we have a lot of fun, we get outside, we watch birds. I can't seem to stop bird watching these days. I have bird socks on. Can't see that online, but we just have a lot of fun. So I encourage y'all to get involved. And then last year alone, we planted over 5,000 trees. And pollinator plants, and this is probably underdone because it's hard to report all of it. We removed over 115,000 pounds of trash that could otherwise get entangled or cause suffocation with wildlife. 114 projects involving over 2,000, almost 2,500 volunteers. Some of this is probably underreported too. We do other projects like installing bat roosts, bird nesting boxes, creating pollinator gardens. We do all kinds of stuff. If you have an idea for a project, that's what the chapters are for. Reach out to your chapter. If you have a spot that needs some invasives removed, none of that's up here, but we've removed, I don't know how many pounds of invasive species. I've been cut all over by Iliagnus and just some invasives. So it's a lot of stuff we do. If there's a park that you want to see restored, reach out to your local chapter. We shouldn't have to do all this, but unfortunately, there is a bit of a problem. I think we would all agree that wildlife and habitat are at risk today for a lot of these reasons right here: development, fragmentation, climate change. Actually, this species right here is a snow geese. And in the winter, they come all the way down to northeastern North Carolina and overwinter in our wildlife refuges out there where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We got Lake Mattamuskeet, Pocosin Lake Wildlife Refuge, Alligator River, Pea Island. But when we continue to develop habitats like that, when the climate continues to shift, it puts a strain on a lot of these critters. It's like the farthest south the tundra swans and the snow geese go, so we're very fortunate. But you can see scenes like this all across Charlotte, all across pretty much anywhere in North Carolina. We're one of the fastest growing states in the country. Mecklenburg County is one of the fastest growing counties. Charlotte's one of the fastest growing cities. It extends out to Union County, Iredell County, Gaston County. I mean, we're clearing land and habitat, removing topsoil, and then putting all types of development on top. So we remove all the natives, we remove all the cover, all the stopover habitat, replace it with lawn and turf. I love these houses just getting baked in the sun, wouldn't it? Like, talk about your air conditioning bill. So it's just tough for some of these critters. And then also, on top of that, our industrial agriculture systems, aren't feeding any wildlife. They're promoting monocultures and using pesticides and fertilizers. So it's a heavy load on the environment and wildlife. You have cars, obviously. I mean, I could shout out numbers and stuff. US land has impervious parking lots. Let's see, 40 million acres of US consist of lawn. 5.5% of all US land is impervious parking lots. That's kind of hard to wrap your head around. 36 million trees are lost every year. All this stuff just contributes to the loss of biodiversity, which sustains our food webs, sustains our ecosystems, our function. That's what keeps our food in our bellies, our air clean, our water clean, carbon out of the atmosphere. So we're just doing the opposite. And then to top it all off now is this beast that's climate change, that's food webs, ecosystems that are already stressed now are getting pushed over the brink. And climate change could push some of our species past the brink. So not to mention other man-made issues, introduced plants or invasive plants. I'm gonna try to hit this point hard. Is there anyone in the room who's not familiar with the term invasive? And it's okay if you're not, but an invasive or introduced species is a plant, animal, fungus, biological organism that was been introduced, whether intentionally or accidentally by humans, that has negative impacts on ecosystems, human health, or the economy, or all of the above. And we'll talk about that a lot, because when we're talking about gardening for wildlife, one of the biggest things is to remove these invasive plants. So, not to harp on the problem anymore, but just imagine for a second, you're one of these migrating songbirds, American redstart. This is an ovenbird, a black and white warbler, a black-throated blue. And I say a journey north, because this is migration north right now, this time of year. A lot of these birds are coming from Central, South America, making huge, arduous flights, like over the Caribbean, over the Gulf, right? Burning up lots of calories, lots of energy, and they're ready to stop in your backyard for a rest and a snack, right? But this is what they see. Nothing. Turf is not much. Turf grass doesn't really support anything but like maybe like a turf or sodworm or something, which is not native anyways, but that's a biological desert. Let's just pretend these are all Bradford pear trees. Probably all Bradford pear trees. So they're like, all right, let's try next door. Well, not much going on next door, you know. Maybe they'll find some. We'll talk about introduced plants, and the food, if any they produce, is not nutritious, not valuable really to native wildlife. So, not to mention, some of these birds are nesting and breeding here, and there's nowhere for them to do it. Like, why are there no birds in my yard? Why don't I have a nest in my yard? And I'm not trying to call anyone out. This is just a generalization. If you look across the landscape across the United States, some of us here are maybe in various states of restoring our yard and properties. And I meant to say, if you have a question during this presentation, feel free to just shout it out or raise your hand, because I do kind of like the back and forth. When I'm at a presentation, I'm not shy and I'll shout out a question. So I do encourage and welcome y'all's participation or questions at any time. And those in the chat, we'll get to those at the end. So just put your questions in the chat. We'll make sure to get to them at the end. So imagine though, if you're one of those beautiful, and again, birds are easy to capture and easy to connect with. So I use birds. Imagine if you're one of these beautiful songbirds, and instead of seeing this, you see this or this. And it's not just one house on a street of 100, it's 50% of the houses. It's much more, you can breathe a sigh of relief. You've gone 500 miles, 1,000 miles, and you have somewhere to rest and cover and recover and eat. So that's the solution. And we're all part of the solution. So the history of conservation in this country has been just to protect large tracts of pristine wilderness, right? And that is awesome, because those are places to house biodiversity and isolation, genetic diversity. And let me just be transparent. I'm not a biologist. I'm an environmental educator. I don't have a degree in biology, a resource degree and education degree. So I can't answer the questions as a true wildlife biologist might. So there are probably some questions you have that I can't answer. And that's all right. And that's part of this all we'll learn together. But thanks to guys like John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt, Otto Leopold, Edward Abbey, I mean, a lot of these, Rachel Carson, you know, we've had some success, and we have our national parks, we have our federal lands, our wildlife refuges, our BLMs, and we did a good job. But we're still losing wildlife. Species are still going extinct. So we have to expand what is conservation. It can't just be something that a biologist does, something that a conservationist does. It has to be all of us together. And that is what the Wildlife Federation is all about. That is what the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards are all about. We can exist with wildlife in our yards. No one's gonna ask anyone to restore their yard to a pristine natural world. I mean, did anyone attend Nolan's presentation about the history of the land and the environment? So like Nolan was saying, humans came across the land bridge, what, 10, 15,000 years ago, and have wreaked havoc on the environment ever since. And it's finally caught up to us because there's so many of us now. We're never gonna go back. We're never gonna have woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and the charismatic megafauna and the ground sloths. But what we can do is restore our yards to have some function, to have an active food web. So that is what gardening for wildlife is all about, is doing what you can to create and conserve habitat right at the local level. And most all land in the country is privately owned. So whether it's a business or your house, that's where the land is. That's where the conservation work can take place. So we need to shift our priorities. People are gonna die for their lawns, right? I mean, Bermuda grass on your bare feet feels really nice, right? And there's a place for turf grass and lawn. But if we want to restore our food webs and function in our ecosystems and ensure we have clean water, clean air, food in our bellies, carbon in the ground and on the atmosphere, we need to restore the function in our own yards. So we can do that by shifting our priorities, and not thinking about these non-native lawns that are ornamentally gardened. Has anyone in here, was anyone in here big, huge on turf grass, gotta have the greenest fescue or the finest Bermuda, and then had a realization and shifted? I'd just be interested to know if anyone has thoughts on, because I've seen some people who have switched and who have come to understand the importance. It's usually because they had a connection with a monarch butterfly or something else in the environment that lit a light in their head. But anyhow, feel free to share at any point. So to shift our priorities and to support wildlife in our backyards, which won't just support wildlife, it'll support the full function of our ecosystems that all life depends on. So the first way is to provide food. And I put native plants 5 times. It's not bird feeders, it's native plants. And we'll talk more about this, but native plants have co-evolved with the insects that eat them, which are the base of the food web for all other organisms. So, and then everyone needs water. Everyone needs cover and shelter. And I put native plants here too, because they can provide the same cover of your non-natives, of your Chinese hollies and your crepe myrtles. All animals need places to raise young. And when I say animals, I don't discriminate. I include slugs and beetles and ants and lizards and salamanders and birds, of course, right? Birds too. And then if we're gonna create this, we gotta use sustainable practices. We can't create all this and then douse our properties in chemical pesticides, and try to kill all of our mosquitoes and put fertilizer down everywhere and just use water until we run out. So sustainable practice is a huge part of it. So we'll start with food. So providing food. Let me see. Hi. So I think everyone knows all energy comes from the sun, right? And plants are the only organisms that can capture that energy and turn it into food, which is sugar and carbohydrates stored in leaves and roots and so forth. So they are the base of the food web. They're the only organisms, well, you get into plankton and algae and stuff, but we'll stick with plants. We're talking terrestrial ecosystems today. They're the only organisms that can capture that energy and convert it into food. So they are the base of the food web. They make this food. And then all other life relies on the animals that can eat those plants. Sure, some mammals and stuff can eat plants. But there's not a lot of animals that eat plants and transfer that energy up the food web. But insects, plant predators like insects, are the best at converting that stored energy in plants to food, bringing that energy up the food web. Every time you go up the food web one level, you lose energy until you get all the way to the top. So insects are really good at converting that plant energy into food. So basically, plants allow insects to eat sunlight, basically. And then the insects provide food to other insects. And then those insects eat other insects. And then a bird is an insect that had eaten another insect that had eaten a plant. Right? And the insects that eat the plants also pollinate the food that we eat. Everything is connected to plants. And all that energy is available to everyone else only if there are insects and plant predators that can eat those plants, right? You might have 5,000 plants in your yard, right? 100 Rafford 50 crepe myrtles, 30 privets, 50 Iliagnus, a lot of English ivy, some Johnson grass, some ground ivy. What else do we got? I'm missing so many. Japanese honeysuckle. What else? Knotweed, wisteria. But guess how many animals can eat those plants that I shouted at? I would say less than 10, less than 5, probably. I know there's one caterpillar that can eat kudzu. It's like a little skipper that just happened to have that defense. So these plants don't want animals to eat them, right? They want to survive and reproduce. But if they got grazed to the ground, they wouldn't survive. So plants have all these chemicals and poisons that prevent animals and insects from eating them. But what happens is you have insects that have evolved over thousands and millions of years with these plants, and they've evolved adaptations to be able to eat certain plants only in certain groups, right? They can't eat any of the other ones. When you bring in a plant that's not native, that doesn't have natural diseases or plant predators, there's no plants to eat it. There's no mechanism to bring that energy up the food web. So I think I went on and on, but that is the importance of plants. So that's what we can do in our own yards is to plant these natives that have these existing relationships so we can reestablish and rebuild our food webs and begin to restore some of the function that we've been missing that's been causing species to decline and to go extinct. So go native. I haven't said enough. Go native, because those are the plants that are recognized as food. The introduced plants, now they're not all invasive. Even the ones that are not invasive, they still don't have the same relationships with our native insects, diseases, and plant predators. The diseases are important too, because when you introduce a plant that has no disease to get them, then it just takes over. There's no disease, there's no plants to eat them, so they just take over. And then, let's just say, for example, if there's black cherries in your yard that host 200 moth and butterfly species, now they can't live anymore. So you drastically just reduce, you introduce one plant, right? So there's a new plant in the ecosystem, more diversity, right? No, maybe on a large scale, if you look at the scale of the United States, we've added new invasive plants. So there's more plants in our country now, but locally, they overtake all the habitat. So the diseases and plant predators are huge. So what can we do? We can plant natives. And the biggest group of insects that natives support that are critical to our food webs are bees and caterpillars. So the moths and butterfly species and bees. What's so critical about caterpillars? They're huge, right? Y'all probably seen caterpillars the size of your fingers. They're soft, right? They go down a baby bird's beak easily, and they're packed with like carotenoids, proteins. They provide, so I was reading, I'll talk about Doug Talmy in a little bit, but I was reading his book. It would take 50 aphids to provide the same amount of nutrition as one medium-sized caterpillar. So if you're a mama bird, there's no caterpillars. You have to make 50 trips to get 50 aphids when you could just make one trip for one caterpillar. So if there are no caterpillars, birds they're not gonna be able to nest in your yard. If you're having trouble getting birds to nest in your nest boxes and in and around your yard, that's because you have no caterpillars. And yes.
Are worms the same?
No, worms aren't the same. Sure, everyone thinks of a robin eating a worm, and sure, like animals will use worms or spiders, other arthropods or invertebrates, but they've evolved to feed their young caterpillars, the majority of songbirds. There's a few exceptions, obviously, there's always. They have the nutritional value that nesting and breeding birds need. And chickadees, they only go, 160 feet. Think about a radius or a diameter of, it's like 2 acres essentially when they're breeding, because they can't fly 2 miles to feed their babies. They're gonna starve. So that's a lot of caterpillars. Anyone know how many caterpillars it takes one chickadee to raise a brood? Six.
I read the same book.
Yeah. 6,000 to 9,000. Yeah, and chickadees aren't the only birds that need to feed their young. So and it's even the seed-eating birds, the cardinals, the finches, they still need the caterpillars and the insect protein to raise young. And this is Nature's Best Hope. Dr. Talmy, he's a scientist, entomologist, biologist, University of Delaware. He started the idea of homegrown national park. I have a slide for him coming up. He is a biologist, and he's a biologist that communicates science well to the general public. So what I struggle to maybe articulate, read his book. This is just one of several that he has, and I'll have a slide for it, but it's Nature's Best Hope, Doug Talmy. And they created a native plant finder with the help of the National Wildlife Federation. So you can go online to nwf.org/native plant finder and find what are the best native plants. Because I talk about, I'm heavily focusing on plants that host insects because it's super important. But we also need plants that provide fruit and nuts and seeds and bloom all year long. So when you're talking about providing food, you need to provide food throughout the entire year. So we have a lot of invasive shrubs that produce berries in the fall. Think about your privets. Think about your Elaeagnus, your autumn olives. Yeah, and those are East Asian and evolutionary origin. Their fall berries are very low in fat, high in sugar. Birds migrating south need the opposite. They need berries high in fat concentration. Our native shrubs produce that. The introduced berries are like junk food. It's like going to McDonald's for a bird. Like, we can't resist it. They can't resist it either. Or maybe it's not that they can't resist it, they don't have any other choice. So that's also very important. The fruits and the bloom times, and then diversity. The more you have in your yard, the more resilient it is to pests, the more resilient it is to drought, the more resilient it is to browsing by your rabbits and your deer. You can plant a bunch of the native crabapple trees, keep all the deer distracted, and then all your other garden will, flourish. And then if native plants don't have anywhere to grow, then planting them's not gonna do any good. So that arguably should go first. And I'm conquering this in my yard right now, is trying to first remove these invasive and introduce plants so that I can plant the natives. I've already been saying it, these natives have developed highly specialized relationships with plants. And there's some examples up here. This is, let's see, that's a zebra swallowtail, and its host only on pawpaw, a Asimina species. This is a fritillary impassioned vine. This is a pipe vine swallowtail, spice bush swallowtail. This is nectaring or getting some pollen on the echinacea, but it will only lay its eggs on a couple species within a certain genus. So some plants will host a lot of insects. Some insects only like one plant, so it's good to plant as much diversity as you can. I mean, there's other bugs and insects that have relationships too. And we'll talk about keystones in just a sec. So there's host plants that are critical to the caterpillars, and then there's pollen specialists, pollen plants that are critical to the bees. So 30 to 60% of all of our bees specialize on a certain type of pollen. So bees are vegetarians, whereas their wasp friends are predators. Bees get their protein from pollen and feed it to their young, and then like wasps and other insects will get their protein from being active predators on mostly other insects. But plants don't want to give insects their pollen. They put a lot of energy into creating that pollen so that they can reproduce. So it's hard to get pollen. Pollen is heavy and sticky, but you put bees and plants together for thousands and millions of years. Certain bees figure out how to get certain pollen, right? And you have these very intricate, interwoven relationships. You have bees that can, and they can shape. You ever watch Google like a mason bee landing on a flower? They like come in, pass off, shoot the pollen off. There's some bees that sonicate flowers. And I'll just go ahead and continue because I tend to get carried away. So my apologies. But that's a passion flower bee. That's a blueberry bee. Super cute. Honeybees can't really pollinate a lot of the blueberries the way the native bees can. It takes a lot of honeybees to do half the work. They don't do much of the work. So you'll see that Doug Talamy in his research has come up with keystone native plants. These are plants that host 90% of our lepidopteran species, our moths and our butterflies, that again are critical to transferring that plant energy up the food web. And you can go on the website NCWF.org, Garden for Wildlife, and you could search keystone plants by region because it's different depending on where you are. But by far and large, oak trees and our native oak species host the most butterflies and moths. Some of them you probably don't like, right? Like the cankers, the cankerworms, and the tent caterpillars, and the webworms, and the pinstripe oakworms you see in the fall. Those fat, like black worms with orange stripes. But this is food. Cherries, our native black cherry, our birches, and this 284 species of insects that can lay their eggs on the leaves that allow the caterpillars to feed, and so forth and so on. Maples, crab apples, hickories, pines, Blueberry is great because not only is it a host specialist, it's a keystone pollen plant too. So it's great to plant in your yard. Willows. We'll go on. These are the pollen host plants. Goldenrod supports 42 species of specialized bees. Now, and goldenrod spreads too. You can't kill it. So plant some goldenrod in your yard. Make sure you have room for it. It's fantastic. And you'll just be fascinated by the insects on it in the fall. The beetles, the wasps, the bees. It smells like popcorn, the pollen. It's just a fantastic plant. And it also is a host plant too. So it's a double whammy. Aster, a Symphyotrichum species, they host a lot of specialized bees. The Helianthus genus, swamp sunflower, woodland sunflower, the big tall ones you see in the fall. Black-eyed Susan, so your Rudbeckias. They host specialized bees, but they also host the moths and the butterflies. So some of them are both, which is great. They support the pollen specialists and their hosts. Beggar tick, wingstem, ironweed, coneflower, and you can find this online. Keystone plants by ecoregion, National Wildlife Federation. That was food. The rest will go fast. I promise. If food's not more important than water, I don't know. It can go back and forth, but everything needs water, right? Everything needs water, whether it's daily for cleaning, for drinking, for hydrating, or to live out. Some animals need water to live out their life cycle, right? They have to lay their eggs in water. And so without water, then you can't have these animals at all. So water is super important. I mean, animals can control their body temperature. They can live out their life cycle. And it's a perfect example right here. So North Carolina is fantastic because we have more salamanders here than anywhere else in the world. We have a group of salamanders called the mole salamanders. So think of, this is our state salamander, the marble salamander. This is the spotted salamander. They're completely terrestrial. And they live in the Piedmont forest and the mountain forest. So imagine you're a little subterranean terrestrial mole salamander on land, kind of underground, under the logs all year, and you're waiting for a late winter for some rain and some warmer temperatures and rain. And then you wake up and something is triggered in your brain. Okay, it's time to reproduce. It's time to migrate. So they migrate to their natal vernal pools, or these are areas that fill up with water in the spring and then dry up in the summer. So they lack fish and other predators so they can safely lay their eggs. So at night, these guys come out of the ground en masse. Like our state did a great article about the march of the salamanders. It's really fun to read, but en masse, these guys come out at night when it's raining. And then, so they crawl over logs, they're triggered in, they're zoned in to know where the pool is, the vernal pool, the area of water. Sometimes they have to cross roads, which is, a lot of them get hit by cars, run over by cars. And salamanders don't have skin to really go over roads, so it's hard for them to cross the dry road. But they make it over the road, okay? These guys make it over the road. Let's go. All right, they're going. And then they get to where they're supposed to be, but there's no vernal pool, there's no water source. There's a development where the wetlands can drain or whatever. Nowhere for these guys to lay their eggs. So if I could argue for any reason to add a water feature to your yard, is because some guys need water to complete their life cycle, not just to clean themselves, not just to regulate their temperatures, but to complete their life cycle. And then the roads are a great risk, right? We can't do anything about the roads. The roads are there. Are we going to go out at night with a jackhammer and start removing the road and putting plants in the road? Probably not. But what we can do is put water in our yard. We can make a backyard pond. Now, I don't have experience making backyard ponds or water features. My wife and I just bought our house like a year and a half ago. I have some photos of stuff that I'm doing here coming up. So full disclosure, I don't have experience creating big water habitats. But you can do it, and they don't have to be, you know, super complex, and it might be fun. Some of you, this might be really fun for. Maybe you got some money to throw and you just get in there, create a sweet pond in your backyard. Try to mimic the natural environment. And I put beach style entrance, because critters do need to get in. They can't just dive straight in. And circulating water is good. The sound of running water signals to animals that it's clean and fresh and it's inviting. And animals need water 365 days a year. You should have some leaf litter on the bottom, some stuff floating on the, you know, try to create a natural little pond. Maybe you'll have fun with it. And then these vernal pools, these are those critical habitats that are, they're ephemeral water sources that fill up in the spring. And they're wet just long enough for frogs. And it's not just the salamanders that migrate like that in the spring. There's a lot of frogs and toads that do it as well. But they can safely lay their eggs in these areas away from fish predators and other predators. If you go to Reedy Creek Nature Preserve, they have great marbled salamander habitat. They have lots of vernal pools, and you can see their eggs like February, almost always out there. So play around, just start digging a depression in your yard, see what happens, right? Or use a bird bath. Does anyone use bird baths? Yeah, those are great too. You don't want them to be too deep, and they need to be able to have like, animals need to be able to kind of stick to them and cling to them, so have some sort of rough surface. I'm sure you can get some sweet bird baths at Wild Birds Unlimited, right? Can make your own too. Like, gardening for wildlife is great if you're an artist. If you like to garden and you're an artist, let's see it. Send me some photos in a couple of years when you got it going. You can put some stones in there to help with insects, especially. Insects will drown if they just land straight on the water, and you'll see bees drown all the time trying to have a drink. So put some stones or rocks in there. You don't want to put your bird baths in an area where a hawk's just going to be able to swoop down, or your cat's going to be able to ambush them, right? So think about where you're putting it, and keep it clean, especially in the hot summer. Change it regularly, and even in the winter. I was looking at some videos from Carol Bowie Jackson's yard. She's one of our former board members, and she lives down there in Pineville. She owns Birdhouse on the Greenway. But she has, in the cold of winter, she has video footage, snow on the ground, birds coming to the bird bath. So put the bird bath in your garage at night, maybe so it won't freeze, or you can buy a heater. People will do a lot of things for their birds. And I encourage you to do that too. But keep it clean, change it regularly, you know, get creative. Well, this is a bunch of cedar waxwings, and then there's a robin in the middle. And you can just really get creative. These could be features to your garden, like as you're layering and creating your garden. So bird bath, just some other ideas. A lot of birds like mist. You can buy misters and put like out drippers. Puddling with put some sand and compost and rocks and water, and you'll attract some insects that do a puddling behavior in there, drinking and getting nutrients. So providing cover. The biggest thing I could say is to provide as many nooks and crannies in your yard for as many critters as possible, and don't discriminate, right? Everyone wants the birds, but don't want the snakes, right? Raise your hand if you're scared of snakes or don't like snakes. It's okay. I mean, it's there's only one venomous snake you have to worry about in Mecklenburg County, and it's the copperhead. And just be careful when you're outside. But this is a brush pile. All animals need cover when it's cold. They need cover to stay away from predators. Even predators need cover so they can hunt their prey. It's full circle here. So you see like the bee holes in here, so providing cover. So brush piles, wood piles, and they're fun because instead of when those giant limbs on your willow oak fall, instead of just putting them on the side for the city to come take up, start making a nice a little brush pile. Animals need dead wood. They need cover. They need places to raise their young. They need leaf litter. This is actually from my house. This is big willow oak. I've just slowly been adding to a brush pile here. Some bigger stuff on the bottom, smaller stuff up top. I see the birds hopping on this all the time. I know that it's valuable. Leaving the leaves, a lot of insects overwinter in the leaves. So we're saying that plants are responsible for the food web. It's not just living plants, it's also dead plants. The leaves that die. The cicadas that are coming out now. I live in East Charlotte, not a single cicada. Anyone else have cicadas? Anyone here in the neighborhood? Connie, you got them? You got the cicadas? I think they have like a week left while they're still peeking out.
Oh, yeah.
And if you go to South Charlotte, or Waxhaw area, I know Valentine's, Weddington, Braintree. I encourage y'all to try to get down there. My mom has them all over her house. And she sends me these videos and I'm so jealous. But they'll the little nymphs will drop from the trees into the leaf litter and then go into the ground. Lightning bugs, lots of caterpillars overwinter. So talking about life cycles, providing to create good habitat in your yard, you need to provide habitat for animals to live out the entire life cycle. So lots of moths and butterflies will overwinter as an egg in leaf litter, or even a larvae, or even a pupa or a chrysalis or a cocoon in your leaf litter. So super, super important to leave. You don't have to leave it everywhere, just create one spot in your yard and keep your leaf litter there. It works as great natural mulch, just break it into your beds. Leave the leaves. You'll hear that. That's like an official movement, I think, somewhere. Ground cover is great. Native ground covers, sedges, native grasses provide excellent ground cover for a lot of our critters. And like our blue stem, I think, is also a host for 9 or 10, a decent amount of moths and butterflies. Vertical structure. So if you remember that one photo where it's just lawn and then a couple invasive trees, right, that were highlighted. Animals utilize all these layers from the ground level, the understory, shrub story, mid-story, the overstory, and canopy. There's all different types of birds that they will not stop in your yard. Say you have an overstory, you have a nice canopy, 2 or 3 willow oaks, a nice sweet gum, and you got a nice little shrub layer and some viburnums, but you don't have any dogwoods or redbuds or service berries or hollies that kind of reach this mid-story. Those birds are going to keep on going. So utilize these layers to provide the cover. And then the last one is places for animals to raise young. And if you provide cover, you're usually also providing these places for animals to raise young. And like we have a lot of cup nesting birds, cavity nesting birds that need dead wood. They need cavities. I had a dogwood die in my yard. It had 2 stems. I had a pole saw. So I got it as high as I could and I just left it. It's like 10 to 12 foot snag of dead wood, which will be cover and places for animals to raise their young. Maybe one of your maples or your willow oaks die. Think about leaving a 15 foot.
That red belly woodpecker nesting is a dead limb on my mates.
Yes, see, it's awesome. And then you can watch that, or you might get a white-breasted nuthatch or just a really cool bird. But without that dead wood, you're not going to get it. Without the caterpillars, they're not going to nest there too. So from the overstory to the understory, shrubs and thickets. I have a cardinal that nested in my Chinese hollies. I have these Chinese hollies that are foundation plants. They're terrible. They're as high as that house now. They came with the house. And I'm slowly going to cut them and replace them. But then I saw this cardinal nest in here. So sure, some of your introduced or non-native shrubs might provide one of these functions, but native plants provide all of these. So if you feel bad about cutting down some of your non-natives, don't. Just do it. Leaf litter, Bees nest in plant stems, dead wood, we talked about tree cavities, brush piles. Leave your dead stems. This is a polyphemus moth cocoon. I left my marigold stems up. I know marigolds are non-native, but they're pretty. I plant other natives. And this polyphemus moth, decided to overwinter and build a cocoon on my stems. So you gotta leave some of those stems, for wildlife. Like I was saying, a lot of moths, butterflies, will overwinter in those dead stems. And then eventually bees will nest in them too.
That's one of the things, with your pollinator gardens, with your herbaceous plants, is when they, at the end of their life cycle, is leave them. We want to cut them all down and make everything look neat, but those seed heads provide food in the fall.
Yeah.
And I have a bunch of goldfinches that will eat off of the echinacea and the rudbeckia. And, and like Alden was saying, the bees will nest in, so, put your sign out that it's a wildlife habitat, or that you're gardening for birds, there are different signs you can get like that, but, and just let your neighbors know, I'm gardening for wildlife, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah, and then the Xerces Society. This is University of Minnesota Extension. One of the best things you can do, well, let me go back just a sec. We only have a few slides left. The majority of our native bees, so North Carolina, we have around 400 or 500. North America, we have around 4,000 native bees. About, I might get it wrong, but 70, somewhere between 79%. The majority of them nest in the ground. 70%. And then of those that don't nest in the ground, they'll nest in stems or dead wood. So they need those spaces in the bare ground. They need those stems. This is just a great guide. And I'll have this out. I'm gonna look at it after the end. But in the winter, leave your dead flowers on. Once the birds will eat all the seeds out of them, trust me. Still leave them. And then in the spring, cut back dead flower stalks, leaving stem stubble of varying height, 8 to 24 inches to provide nest cavities. Female bees find cut or naturally broken stems. They start a nest and lay eggs on the pollen balls, so birds eat the pollen. Summer, new growth forms on the perennials. It hides those stems that you don't want to see, right? The new growth will hide it. And then in the fall and winter, bees hibernate stems during the winter. In the spring, they also emerge. And then eventually the old ones just kind of dissolve. Some people like the texture of those seed heads in your garden. So it does provide some nice texture too. So our bees, which are responsible for 1 in every 3 bites of food, is what they say. I think 90% of flowering plants are pollinated by animals, and bees are the majority of the pollinators. Bees and flies. People forget about flies. Flies next to bees are the most effective pollinators. Here's a little mining bee. You usually see them March, April, May. Everyone thinks they're ants. They have all these holes in the ground in their yard. It's just solitary bees. They're not defending a nest. They're not defending honey. They won't sting. It doesn't last very long. The ones that nest in stems, mason bees, leafcutter bees, mason bees especially, they need mud to plug the holes. So if you don't have any bare dirt or clay anywhere, this person left out just on their mulch. They just left some mud in the tray. We won't get into bee hotels. That's a whole different workshop, but you can provide bee houses and bee hotels. Just pay attention to the maintenance. Make sure you're not doing more harm than you are good. Did anyone see anything like this over the spring recently?
Well, I have a question about the bee. Can you put a bee house near birdhouses?
Yeah, you can. You could actually, under your birdhouse, put a little bee hotel. They like to be faced southeast, east, southeast, just like the birdhouses. And they like a roof. It's a hotel, right? It's got a roof.
Be able to either clean it or just use it, like when it's gone through a whole year cycle, replace it. Because you don't want parasites to have gotten there.
They like sunny slopes with exposed dirt. So here's a clever way to kind of put some ground nesting bee habitat. Here's just a bunch of pictures. This is bare ground with bees. This is a stem. That's my containers. I have container gardens too on my back deck. And these are my bee balms in here, and I left the stems. This is the dogwood I was telling y'all about. And then I planted a native gelsemium, the jessamine, the yellow jasmine. So hopefully it'll start just crawl up the whole tree. Yeah, that's the goal anyways. And then use sustainable practices. It's okay if animals are eating your plants. Like, you should celebrate that. That means you have caterpillars, that means you have bees. Celebrate it. Like, people are like, oh no, the bugs are eating my leaves, and then they spray. No, you should celebrate that. Plus, the more plants you put in the ground, the less of an impact that's gonna have. So celebrate that and let it happen. That's good. Try to somehow capture your rainwater. We have so much heavy rain and storms, and all the runoff from our roofs. Try to direct it, and you can dig a depression and put a garden in that, a rain garden. I'm really trying to get a giant rain cistern. You can compost. Trying to kind of close the loop, like the innovation barn with the circular economy. And then, so here's me trying to reduce turf grass on my house. So see this giant pile of wood chips? This doesn't do it any justice. These are fresh arbor chips. You can just Google chip drop and you can get free wood chips. It's not mulch because it hasn't been cooked yet. It's fresh green arbor chips. A lot of the times arborists have to pay someone to get rid of the chips. So I requested them, 3 days later, they were dumped in my front yard, and I did just give them like a $20 donation. But this was enough wood chips for me to spread here's me starting to spread it to kill the grass and the weeds. I spread it, I probably averaged 6 inches, probably not quite enough. You want to get at least 8 inches to kill the grass. And I noticed that even like the strong violets make it through that 6 to 7 inch layer, which it's okay. Violets are native, they're pretty. But that's one way to kill your turf grass is to just smother it in fresh wood chips, at least 8 inches if you can. Do it in the spring if you can, and then in the fall, you can just move it aside where you want to plant stuff. Everything will be dead. Do your fall plantings. So reduce your turf grass, learn and have fun. Like, I think it's fun out there. I'm learning about plants, I'm finding animals and critters. I have all these native wildflowers in these containers. I'm trying to kill all this ground ivy right here. So I'm like, let me just throw some cardboard down, put all my plants over it, and then maybe in the fall, some of it will be dead, and I could plant something in the ground there. That ground ivy is just terrible. It's, at least it pulls up easy, but it's just bad. All right. This is the NC State Plant Toolbox. It's a great resource. If you want to know if a plant's native or the attributes of a plant, what it likes to grow, how much sun, what soil, when it flowers, when it blooms, because remember, you want to design your yard to have food available all year long, have cover and stuff all year long. So this is a great resource for that. And then once you have your habitat created, and once you put in all your native plants, you can register your yard, you can certify it as a wildlife habitat, and get your sign in your front yard. You have a question?
Yeah, you were talking about native plants. I just want to know if that includes cultivars, because it's very hard to get some of the actual native varieties.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The question was native plants, you're encouraging, but what about cultivars and native plants? You'd have to look into a lot of the research. A lot of this research that I've read and what I've learned from other gardeners is a lot of our cultivars of native plants, our nativars, have been genetically modified to the point that they don't provide the same nutritional value. So I would highly encourage and recommend stray species whenever you can. And we have a great list on our website of plant nurseries. You can reach out to us, your chapter, and we can help you find native plants. Lisa Tompkins, Carolina Plant Heritage Nursery. Carolina Heritage Nursery, she can help you out, so we can help you out too. Online on our Butterfly Highway, if you have a pollinator garden, go ahead and register your pollinator garden. Get your Butterfly Highway sign. These will signal to other neighbors. If all your neighbors see turf and crepe myrtles, that's what they're gonna plant. But if people start to see other people doing this, they're like, okay, then I can do it. And so, and that's the same thing for Doug Talon with his homegrown national park. It's essentially trying to get people to do this. So read this book. If you don't understand what I'm saying, if I'm not conveying this, if there's some things that you're still unsure about, this is a really good read. Look into the Butterfly Highway Certified Wildlife Habitat. And yeah. Y'all have any questions? Now it's almost 8:19. Yeah. Natalie, do you have any online questions? You can unmute if you want to talk.
We sure do have some online questions. So sorry, am I very loud?
I think you're fine.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna go down our chat here. We had a question about, from Janet. We have tried native plants, but deer have destroyed most of them. What can you recommend in this case?
Plant more. Plant them in mass. Overwhelm the deer. Not only overwhelm them with one species, but with multiple species. That is all you have to do to solve that problem.
There's, I use something called Repel All. That's the only one that I found really works. It's for deer and rabbits, and you can't spray it on anything you're gonna eat. And you have to use the spray, the granules don't work, but you spray it, soak the leaves with it, and it lasts for like 2 months.
Okay, so Donna said you could use Repel All. You can also, it's a pain, but you can stake around your plants. I know it's not cheap, but plant as many as you can too. Question?
No, I was gonna make a statement.
Sure.
Your question. There are deer resistant natives.
Yes.
And you can plant a ton of those. And what I do is I plant the deer resistant natives around the plants that they tend to like. Bunnies especially, primrose is toxic to them. So I put primrose around the edges of all the things that I don't want the bunnies to.
Yeah.
So, if you find, in the toolbox, that's
Yeah.
helpful in telling you what is, deer resistant.
So what's your name?
Heather.
Heather, thank you. Heather made a fantastic point that there are lots of natives that are resistant to deer and other wildlife and insects. And primrose was an example, and just planting them around the border, and mixing those, and use the NC State plant toolbox to search for those plants. You could search by deer resistant natives in the plant toolbox.
I'd like to ask a question. So you said toxic to the bunnies.
Yeah.
Is it toxic only to the extent that it's discouraging? Because we would not want to.
I have not seen any dead
Fact.
bunnies. I think they avoid naturally, they don't like it, so they stay away from it, and anything that's connected. It spreads like crazy, and it's really scraggly, so, you can plant it kind of around your flower gardens, and it's kind of like low lying, and I plant it around my shrubs, and they stay, I used to have all these shrubs that were down to the middens.
Yeah.
And since I planted the primrose around, they stay away from them, so.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And that's a good follow-up question. But because they're natives, bunnies and these plants, they just innately know not to eat these plants. It's not an introduced plant that they're like, oh, let me eat this, and then, yeah, so.
It acts as a barrier.
Right.
To the plants you are also trying to protect.
Um,
I read recently that, a method for combating deer pressure is to actually plant something they do want to eat off to the side.
yeah,
And have them focus there and possibly stay away from the stuff.
absolutely.
Have them avoid.
That's what Alden said about.
Yeah, the recommendation was plant something they like, give them a bunch, but plant it away from where you don't want them. Yeah.
What about, someone said to sprinkle cayenne pepper on the plants, that deer and bunnies would stay away?
Yeah, I don't have experience with cayenne pepper. I mean, I know that it keeps squirrels off bird feeders.
The only problem is watch the way it rains.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
like.
Concentrate like an oil, yeah.
Like what?
Some of those remedies too will wash off quickly with the rain.
What kind of oil?
Well, there's some companies there's a company called Coles, and they make hot pepper oil.
Oh, hot pepper oil,
Yeah.
okay.
Natalie, did you have any other questions online? I know-
We do. We have a few, and that new mic actually picks up a lot of what's going on in the background, so I think we were able to hear everyone's input. So greatly appreciated. Okay. Our next question, we actually had one in our Q&A portion earlier during our presentation, but Darren asked, how low into the ground is the hard pan in Charlotte? I don't know if you know that, Alden.
Sounds like a soil and geology question that I don't know the answer to, and it probably depends on where you live. All the soils have been altered so much, so unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question.
All good. We can look into it though and
Oh
get
yeah,
back to you.
that's a good point. He could call the local extension office, to help with questions like that. Thank you.
Awesome. Maybe we can include that in the follow-up email, phone numbers to call. Let's see. Our next question, do these invasive plants produce food for birds like the berries that you mentioned? If so, why are they considered a nuisance to wildlife and insects, etc.?
So yeah, I was saying, so a lot of our invasive ornamental berry producing shrubs are like of Eastern Asian and Eurasian origin. And it's a low fat content. Birds need the berries in the fall that are high fat content for migration. So it lacks a nutritional value, and then birds are great at dispersing seeds. So sure, this plant has a food that's something that's edible. There's nothing else that is anything good with a lot of these shrubs. And then the birds eat all these sugary berries and then disperse them. They fly and poop the seeds out, and then they continue to grow and overtake the native plants that produce the valuable and nutritional food for our native wildlife. Kind of like the same with like the butterfly bush. Everyone plants butterfly bushes for their pollinators, but the nectar nutritional value is just different than the natives that our animals have evolved with.
Awesome, thank you. Andrea asks, or Andrea, I apologize if I'm misspoke, but do you have any suggestions for managing or deterring invasive birds? And then there was a follow-up there. She said she saw an article that there are house finches or pigeons that are considered invasive and can be harmful to our native birds.
Yeah, so there's a couple bad invasive birds. The house finches with, the males are red. They're actually native to the western United States. They were introduced in the east and became invasive. House sparrows, native to Europe, become invasive. Same with the starlings. How to control those? I don't know.
If it's a house sparrow nest, I think you can take those out. I think you can disturb those,
Yeah.
they have eggs in them.
So Don is saying you might be able to.
Because they're
Yeah.
not native.
Yeah, because birds are protected by, I think, one of the federal acts a long time ago. So you don't want to mess with songbirds and songbird nests, but perhaps the invasive ones you can move. I would recommend them to reach out to the Audubon Society, the local chapter, for resources there. Yeah, I know sometimes you can stop feeding your birds because I know the house finches love the bird feeders.
Yeah, I do know there's also like bird feeders that are not friendly to house finches. That's depending on like the size of like where they stand or where they perch. Okay. Let's see. I'm just reading through.
You got a few more minutes.
Yes. So if some birds are not welcome, what if we provide greater access to what the local birds need?
So that's a great way to counteract the invasive birds, is provide the native food, water, cover, shelter that the native birds need? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yes, that's it. It also sounded like a suggestion.
Yeah.
So- Yeah, all right, but that is all that we have online.
Any other questions in person before we do our raffle? Wonderful. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks everyone online. Thanks for your questions. And I hope that everyone has fun in their yards. If you ever need help, please reach out to your local chapter, Charlotte Wildlife Stewards in Charlotte, or reach out to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I didn't include my email, but just go on ncwf.org and you can find it. All right, Natalie, we're gonna tune out for the raffle.
I do have one question.
Okay,
I
final
think you guys said this is a monthly routine. Does the content vary from month to month?
But our programs here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the speaker series and we do it, September, October, November, take December off, then we do January through May. And we have different speakers on different topics, so this past year we had a speaker on coyotes, on spiders, changes in the land, which is really mind-bending. I can never remember all of them, nature at your door. And then Alden, volunteered to this program. Next year, we're gonna have someone to talk on the mammals of North Carolina.
Dr. Steve Fields, our next speaker is September because we take the summer off. We have Dr. Steve Fields, the curator for the Museum of York County. He's a biologist, mammologist, professor at Winthrop, and it's every second Tuesday at 7. September, October, November, and then January through May here at Sardis Baptist Church.
Yeah, so,
September will be the next presentation.
yeah, and that's the one we're gonna have.
Mhm.
And then we're scheduling those for next year, so we're hoping to have one on bats. I'd like to get someone to talk about ants. I think that would be fast.
Yeah, folks online or here in person, if y'all know anyone that has an expertise, or if you have an expertise and want to give a program, we're more than welcome to discuss that, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, so